just in general, how I mentioned my brief overstatement, kind of how it's going to look and what we have close. The first thing I'm going to talk about is just some non-cybernetic kind of technology that we have now that you see a lot in Ghost in the Shell. The one on the left is, of course, Google's self-driving car. Now, in Ghost in the Shell, it's a weird conundrum. You see a lot of self-driving cars in that, but usually someone is driving it while they're not paying attention. So it's kind of a similar technology, but this is the much more realistic version. And then on the right is, of course, a robot. And in the world of Ghost in the Shell, usually the most seen are either weird androids attacking them, like especially in the second movie, where it's all about the androids with like the weird fake ghosts. But modern technology for the androids, for robots and kind of android technology is getting ridiculously complex. I know this isn't the one, but it's the same company that this one had just basically it's a torso, a rail station, and it could answer questions based on the questions people had. So you could be like, I want to go here. How much do I need to pay in rail fare? Where do I need to make connections? And it can tell you all that information. And that's basically what the world of Ghost Shell uses them for. You primarily see them in Section 9 when they have an operation going on, and they all have the weird, like, crazy typing hands. And that's basically where that technology is going. And then the other time you usually see them is usually they end up being like robot maids or robot servants that end up having bazookas in their arms, because why not? Talk briefly about military tech. I mostly just want to talk about one of the very iconic things in Ghost in the Shell is of course the tanks and the weird crazy spider tanks. The cool thing about that is that's kind of how a lot of people think that technology is going. And on the right, if you haven't seen the video of this thing, just go on YouTube and search weird military spider crawler. I don't know its actual name, but
Big dog.
Huh?
Big dog.
Big dog, yeah. And it basically looks like a nightmare. But it can also climb up hills and really varied terrain. And again, when you have a tank, it can't really go through a heavily forested area. It can't go up certain hills. But these things can climb up pretty much any surface. And a lot of people feel that's where the technology is really going, to making these more almost spider-like tanks. Another big one Ghost in the Shell constantly shows is the invisibility. Now, I used one from the movie because the TV show is just laziness, because they just have them go invisible whenever they need to. For the sake of animation. But in the movie, you actually see Motoko in the scene after she fights the one guy in the rain, kind of reveal, and you can see that it's like a clear, almost film kind of suit she wears. And that's probably what's more going to be close. And above, you have what's being hailed as kind of the first invisibility cloak. And basically what these cloaks do is they refract light to show and make that kind of camouflage. I can't remember, I couldn't find, those I tried because these are linked to everything, I couldn't find if these are actually concept or actual pictures, but from what they've been saying, is they're actually able to do this to a degree. Now, the show does do a better way of saying that that's pretty much how invisibility would probably look. It's not going to be straight invisible. You're not going to be able to just walk into a room and like stare at someone in the face and be like, I see you. That's not going to happen. You're going to always have that filmy outline you can see, that someone's going to be able to, if they're paying attention, know what they're looking for, they're going to see you. Cybernetics and cyberbodies. This is, again, the huge thing in Ghost in the Shell, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about that. First thing I want to talk about is kind of I'm going to talk about different section parts of it, and then mishmash it all together and tell you and show you how that's going to be. Now, optical is probably going to be one of the first implants that's going to become a real kind of everyday thing that people just get. In the world of Ghost in the Shell, most people don't have full cybernetic bodies. Pretty much stated in the beginning of the movie and the beginning of the TV series, it's pretty much stated that only people in like the government in Section 9 have these full cyber bodies. And most people are like Tokaza, who have simple optic implants that allowed them to basically, as you can see on the left, read these super condensed documents and then get the heads-up optical display. And in the real world, this technology is already becoming a thing. Google Glasses is kind of already starting that trend of where it's going to be. And as you can kind of see on the one on the right, that's kind of how it's going to be, is that people will just use it for everyday things like phones. And that's really, I think, a lot of these early technologies that we're going to get to is going to reach this, because people have a drive for it. The question is, again, how easy is the technology going to be? And it's going to have to get to a point where where most people can afford it, and it's not obnoxious to get, like paying $1,000+ for weird, ugly-looking glasses. Whereas implants in your eyes that no one can see that allow you to get phone calls, surf the internet, I think everybody would pretty much up with that. Another aspect of it is military applications, as we see with Saito's eye, which allows him to link to a satellite to basically turn his eye into a super high definition sniper rifle. And basically makes him, and those of you who don't know, when someone's being a sniper, they have someone called a spotter, who basically gets the wind stream trajectory and scopes out the target, and then the sniper just kind of adjusts and aims using his guidance. In the future, I think that's going to be a thing of the past, because something like this would be much more practical. I don't think it's going to be like Saito, where they're just going to be like, okay, you're a cyborg now, and I'm going to put a thing in your eye. It could, but I don't think that's how it's going to go. It very likely will just turn it all into one really complicated scope. Hijacking optical implants. Again, this is probably the thing people know most about Ghost in the Shell is the Laughing Man and his ability to hijack just about anything. But the funny thing about this is kind of become a thing too. You've seen anyone who has a smartphone has seen a billion apps that allow you to project stuff over something else. There's one that puts little penguins in front of you on the sidewalk and the penguins walk around. And you get stuff like that. And it's not far to think, again, if we're going to a point where everyone has optical kind of like devices in their eyes, it's very easy for someone to instantly kind of make like a spam virus or something that allows them to control multiple people's eyes from a lot of different perspectives. Now, the cool thing about this is this came out probably like a month or two ago, but a Japanese company has actually been developing pretty much the exact technology I've just been talking about that hides your facial recognition from smartphones and Google Glasses. And so basically what's going on here is it's got a series of kind of light activations that makes your face unrecognizable by phones and optical devices. And this is kind of important because in the future, if that's the case, a lot of people will be using these as security devices to instantly facially recognize someone. So the idea of this technology could be very dangerous. But it's, again, things like the Laughing Man is already kind of existing. I'm going to talk a little prosthetics. Prosthetics are probably the most lucrative right now in people trying to make well-working cybernetics, because everyone has someone's lost an arm or a leg. There's tons of people, soldiers, people in accidents, people with birth defects. It's a hugely profitable area, and everyone's trying to make it. I put my favorite, because this is from a British company, and the cool thing about this is exactly what he's doing is he's holding an egg perfectly still, and he's able to crack it, which gives it this immense amount of dexterity that he can easily, because it's built with a simple pressure sensor, so that he just kind of has to flex his limb, and it flexes, but he can control it so dynamically that he can pick up an egg without cracking it. There used to be a problem with them is, I have a few here, like this one is kind of cool. She's using neurological implants to control the arm. This is cool. This technology is so very far off and is not really viable right now. It's cool and it shows the potential for having this kind of technology, but I think this specific arm probably costs a couple $100,000 just to build that rig. And it's infeasible for someone on a basic human scale to be able to afford that. Nowadays, people are kind of going towards, for basic prosthetics are going towards the, what's that thing where you make stuff out of plastic?
3D printing.
Yes, 3D printing, thank you. Going for 3D printed arms because for printing one arm can cost like a couple $100, if even that, as opposed to a couple $1,000s it currently costs to get a prosthetic arm of decent quality, which is especially helpful for children because when you have someone growing every year, getting a new prosthetic arm every year tends to become very expensive. If any of you watched the World Cup, I'm sure you saw the image on the right. This is a newly designed kind of exoskeleton that, I'm going to use big air quotes here, allows people to walk. It allowed him to move like 2 feet, and not even 2 feet, like 2 inches and kick a ball. But it's still an impressive feat of technology that's going to become the future of kind of giving people back their mobility. And again, all technology in the beginning is going to seem like it does nothing, but you just have to, the thing I'm going to say time and time again is you just got to think about the internet and think about how less than 20 years ago the internet like wasn't a thing to most people, and now it's just embedded everywhere. Now I'm just going to talk about the possibility of cyber bodies, of full cyberizations. Now, there's 2 big things I want to talk about here, and is a cyber body is almost entirely, for every character except for Motoko, is a majority of their organs are still intact. Motoko is the only one in pretty much the entire show that has a full cyber body. She has only her brain and her spinal cord, because her origin is like, she has like 4 different origins of how she got her cyber body. I'll stick with the show one where she's in a plane crash and her body's so badly damaged that they use this radical technology and save her brain and implant in this full cyber body. Now most people would be like Bato, who has most of his organs and his main torso is pretty much still human. He has cyber eye plants, brain case, arms, I think, and his legs are all cybered. Now the realism in Ghost in the Shell, as Ghost in the Shell describes it in the manga and in a couple of the supplementary stuff, they describe it as having the brain and the brain stem, because you need the spinal cord, because you can't live without, you're still just, it won't function without your spinal cord. The TV shows and the movies all kind of skirt that and just kind of show a brain. But they say there's a spinal cord, but there's no evidence that there actually is. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the legal implications of it. This guy is Neil Harbison. He's an artist, and he's also the first technically recognized cyborg in the world. His passport is he was the first person to have on his passport that he is a cyborg/person. He has this weird, it's literally an antenna embedded in the base of his skull. He was born without the ability to see color, so he only sees in grayscale. So his implant allows him to see in all kinds of different colors and infrareds. So he makes all this cool art in these weird infrared kind of inversions. And you can see, again, how the technology has progressed. The one on the left is him from probably a few years ago when he first got his passport. And you can see it's a whole big piece of his head, and it's got all these cables. And now it's down to just this little cord and this, the camera feature. The also legal implications is something Ghost in the Shell starts around again, because in the show, Motoko is a kid when she gets cyberized, and so is the bad guy from season 2. And basically it probably wouldn't happen. No one would probably let that happen, because the body's still developing. And basically, if you did that, you probably, I can't really say what the implications would be because it's theorizing, but it wouldn't be good. Because it's thinking about just putting someone's brain who's still developing into a body that's never going to grow. It could either mean they're going to stay a child forever, or they're just going to go insane, or just turn to mush and become useless. The other thing is, no one is going to have a high level of cyberization outside of the government. Ghost in the Shell does that pretty well, and I think that's a pretty good representation of what it'll ultimately be like. Because it'll pretty much only be people. The problem with it is you're going to have constant maintenance required, and that's going to just cost so much money. I realized I got ahead of myself. First, just talk about the tech limitations. Even with a full cyber body, you see in Ghost in the Shell all the time, they're using supplemental kind of devices to help them hack or help them dive into the internet, all those kinds of things. That I don't think is going to be a possibility, because as much as you keep the human brain, it's still going to need something to process it. I don't think we'll ever get to the point where our human brains will be just as good as a computer at doing like a billion different tasks at once. Stress on the body, where I got ahead of myself. You see in this episode especially, Motoko has to change her whole body out. And she mentions that she has to do this on occasion. That would be a total thing you would have to do. Because your body, again, would be like, think about it as building your own PC. And the PC's running high performance games all the time. Eventually it's going to start wearing and tearing. There's not how much we can keep of it, and it's still going to require upkeep. And it'll be even more dangerous because it has living tissue inside. And you have to, and it's like, think about it, like, you don't leave your PC's fans, dust it out every once in a while just to get some fuzz in there. That's not so good if that happens and your pancreas is in there. Not so good. Another major issue is, this isn't a Ghost in the Shell thing. It's brought up a little bit in Ghost in the Shell, but it's more talked about in the video game Deus Ex. But rejection is a huge issue. It's seen a lot of people, there have been some prosthetics that have been able to skin graft and do stuff like that, and they've just straight out rejected it. And that's gonna be a huge problem is, if you put somebody's brain in spinal column and somehow you keep them from dying, and then you can put a bunch of their organs in and keep that going, is it going to reject, or are you just gonna die immediately? That's gonna be, I think, the biggest step block in just this idea of getting a full cyber body, is just this enormous stress that it's going to place on your body. And just do a little bit, again, I give the Arthur C. Clarke quote, any significantly advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And again, like I was saying with things like that, if you went back 60 years with an iPhone, and we're like, hey, look at this, I've got the entire internet, someone would think you're a demon. They would think you're a demon, lock you up, and that would be the end of the story. And that's the thing, we look at this technology, we look at something that's like 20 years in the future. I don't think we'll be at Ghost in the Shell technology in 20 years in the future. I think some of it we will. I think the potential for kind of partial cyberization with prosthetics and eye implants, stuff like that, in 30 years, we might be there. You never know. It's again, in 10 years, we went from having, I was actually trying to find the image, but we went from, I think like 15 years having like a floppy disk, carry like nothing, to something the size of like my thumbnail that carries like more than some computers. And technology is constantly getting better and faster and smaller. And I think in terms of technology, yeah, the full cyber bodies, I think it's a pipe dream. It would be really cool, really cool. I would be the first person to sign up. I'd be like, oh no, my hand's gone. I think I need a cyber body now. I don't know what happened. I was playing with this meat cleaver and
What about the transference of consciousness to the internet?
That I also don't think is a possibility. It's again, I'm going to just point to this quote because that's a really hotly debated topic. Because I tried to bring up what my consensus on it is. I agree that I don't think it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really important reason why. In theory, you could do it. In theory, the problem is when you're thinking about replacing actual parts of the brain to make it conscious, first you have to accept the fact that neurological sciences already do that the brain is the soul. There is no soul. Once you get over that hurdle, the real issue is when you think about the brain replaces every cell in the system every 5 years. Could you do that really slowly with mechanical parts? Possibly. The problem with that is the systems, your brain is a series of systems interacting with each other, and if you try and put that onto the internet, you lose those systems interacting with each other. You can't make it into pure data. Your brain, one part of your brain is working against the other part of the brain, literally the right growth in the right hemisphere inhibits growth in the left hemisphere. You can't do it because you have to have those physical parts interacting with each other. That really is the basis in neurology of consciousness.
More likely, technology like that will become just more of a virtual world kind of deal, where you won't really project yourself into the internet. You'll become kind of like an avatar controlling the internet in a weird backdoor kind of way. But I don't think you'll ever be able to put your own consciousness onto just put it out there. But yeah, like the whole point of the movie, that's just no science fiction. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to James.
Hi, I'm James. So, just to expand a little bit. So my area is criminology. I've got my undergraduate and master's degree in criminology at the University of Westchester. I've worked for SAP for 2 years doing cybersecurity, specifically their RSA systems. And now I currently work as a fraud specialist at a company I will remain nameless because I don't represent them. And it's an all online bank. So believe it or not, I will talk a lot about cybercrime. I'll also talk about cyberterrorism. Cyberterrorism is a major issue in cybercrime in general. Most of the stuff you have to do when you sign up for a bank account or any of that other stuff that's highly regulated, all that information you have to give is mostly because of terrorism. But we'll start with cybercrime first. So in a really broad sense, I mean, cybercrime is, and I'll say this over and over again, cybercrime basically is real-world crime using information technology. That is really the fundamental of Ghost in the Shell when it uses and talks about cybercrime. It's the idea that it is the same crimes using different technology, different tools, different forms. So the first thing I really want to get across that Ghost in the Shell is incredibly accurate about, especially when it comes to cybercrime, is its international nature. There is it is very, very rare that cybercrime doesn't take on some international element. The reason for that is you have it jumping from servers to servers. The people who are able to who have the knowledge and skill sets to commit these crimes do them internationally most of the time, especially the more advanced. If you look at the FBI's top 10 most wanted cyber criminals, not one of them, or no, I think 2 of them do. 2 of the 10 live in the United States. It is an international form of crime. What that also means from an enforcement perspective is, as Aramaki does, we have to take it to an international level. We need to participate with other countries. Guess what? In the real world, most cybercrime you're seeing in the United States is starting in Russia. Guess how fun that is to enforce right now. We don't have good relations, and it makes it very difficult. The Ghost in the Shell is so painfully accurate on this. When Japan has political issues with other countries in that show and in the movies, it makes the whole thing fall apart, and it's just as true in real life. There are major cyber criminals out there that we can't touch because Russia won't let us, or because China won't let us, or because other countries that we do not have the best relations with. So, perp and the motives. This gets a little complicated when we're talking in terms of Ghost in the Shell. Again, the fundamental principle of Ghost in the Shell, as far as the crime is considered, is the cyber world is spilling out into the real world. You're having this mix and match of things. The motives, by and large, that are represented in Ghost in the Shell aren't that particularly accurate. And I don't really see that changing. Just because technology becomes more advanced, these motives aren't going to change. Especially with cyber criminals. When you're talking about cyber criminals, lot of the time the motivation is to outsmart, to seem powerful. These are people who can sit at their computer and destroy and cost people millions and millions of dollars for no reason sometimes. A lot of the time the reason they do it is because I can do it, because I can show the world I'm smart. You also have other motives. Of course, you have what's called patriot hacking, which is when a hacker breaks into a system to prove that you can't get through it. Still incredibly illegal, by the way. Don't do that. That does take up a fair amount of the federal government's prosecutions. That is probably more frequent than you might think. People hacking into FBI websites, CIA, NSA, saying, hey look, this is a system. It's like, oh great, now we're gonna have a 2-year trial and put you in jail for 5. So that does take up a lot of time. The other motives, when we're talking about, say, the laughing men, that does happen. That is also a really major concern in cybercrime. When we talk about the origination of the laughing men and Ghost in the Shell, the idea that a disgruntled worker who knew about the company's mismanagement of treating the multiple sclerosis cyber version, that is a common concern. That is probably one of the top concerns in cybercrime, is disgruntled employees. They have accessibility, they already have the knowledge set. And when we're talking about cybercrime, again, the thing to think about is who has the skill set to do it. Ghost hacking, is it really possible? No. Next slide. Ghost hacking, again, and as I was saying before with the ghost hacking, what you're fundamentally asking is the human brain just nothing but a bunch of neurons with no actual soul to it, no division or anything like that, no dualism? It's probably, not to push any political agendas or philosophical ones, but it's probably true, but not the point here. So would ghost hacking therefore be possible? Not really. You could get, as Tom was saying before, you can hack visual systems. You can do kind of that stuff. Is there going to be someone who can, if you get cyberized, is there going to be this guy who can hack into your whole system and just make you do whatever he wants as a puppet? Absolutely not. These technologies that are going to create any cyberization of your body, of your actual sensory systems, are going to be really specialized. They're going to take very specialized knowledge to do each specific one. No one person's really going to have this super broad knowledge. It doesn't really happen in the real world. Again, referring back to the FBI's top 10 most wanted cyber criminals, a lot of those criminals are of the same group. There's actually one of the top 10 most wanted isn't an individual, it's a group. That's real crime. That's real cyber crime, multiple people. Number 2, 3, and 4 are all Chinese military. And they were a group with very specialized knowledge. They divvied it up. This guy was a specialist in this guy was a specialist in this. It's going to be the same issue with ghost hacking. The person who knows how to hack your eyes isn't going to be the person who knows how to hack your arm. The person who knows how to hack your arm isn't going to be the person who knows how to hack your leg. That's how it would be in ghost hacking. That's the way it would be in the real world. Hi, sorry. Standalone complex. I actually think this is one of the more interesting aspects in Ghost in the Shell in general. For those of you not fully aware of or not familiar with what was meant by the standalone complex, it's a copycat crime that doesn't have an original crime committed. That does happen in the real world. It generally happens with arsons. A building burns down, the media claims it was an arson. Someone copycats that arson. A little bit later, they find out it's an electrical fire. That kind of thing does happen in the real world. As far as standalone complexes, it's addressed in Ghost in the Shell. It's not really I wouldn't call it a true standalone complex, but it does happen a lot on. Cybercrime is definitely going to be a top culprit of this kind of thing. Computer errors, things like that, memes are an analogy used in the show over and over again. It does show the potential for it. It does happen. If we look at something like some group like Anonymous, and for the intents and purposes of this presentation, we will consider them a criminal group. Their original purpose isn't their purpose now. Their original purpose was to hack and protest against Scientology. Clearly not the case anymore. They aspired to this whole thing, and there's a lot of crime being committed as that really aren't anonymous. Anyone can just say they're anonymous, which is, I mean, kind of the point of the group. But you get standalone complexes from that. It's going to happen over and over again. The things that gets wrong with it is when these groups, and you saw it with Anonymous and LulzSec, when you have these groups working, so in the second season, they try and make a standalone complex. The main villain in it tries to make a standalone complex with multiple people with different motives, but they fall under this illusion of the intent of their group, and it's an artificial standalone complex. In the real world, it would just end up in them fighting each other, falling apart. Saw it with LulzSec. LulzSec turned into a group that was not as ideologically motivated as Anonymous, and issues like that will just keep happening over and over again. It's more Wild West than Ghost in the Shell makes it seem. Yep. It's terrorism, cyber warfare, and hacktivism. What are they, and what's the difference? It's really hard to define them. There actually is no solid definition. If you ask the United States government, cyber terrorism needs to fall under 2 criteria. Those criteria are that it is focused against a critical infrastructure, critical platform. It can't just be, I hacked the FBI's website and defaced it. That doesn't count as cyber terrorism in the United States government's definition. Sorry, I'm having a
Power grid.
Oh, power grid, yes, exactly, like a power grid. Even as much as just it doesn't have to be the full power grid. You can take out a nuclear power plant or gas power plant. That would be true cyber terrorism. The second requirement of the United States government is that it cause casualties. If you take out the power grid, is it necessarily going to cause casualties? It's kind of a weak definition, in my personal opinion. So if I just take down the power grid but no one dies as a result of it, it's no longer cyber terrorism. It's like, oh, okay. No. So a more concrete definition would be, I think, trying to take down critical infrastructure for political means or goals. Cyber warfare can look very much like cyber terrorism. The only difference is it's government funded. That's really it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like privateers. Exactly, right? Yeah, I mean, and it does make these definitions very difficult, because what if a Saudi prince funds Al-Qaeda? Does that make it cyber terrorism, or does that make it cyber warfare? So it gets really gray. All these hacktivism. If you take the FBI, or the government, U.S. government's definitions, it's just anything that doesn't really, defacing the website, things like that. Political purpose, again, same as cyber terrorism. How accurate does Ghost in the Shell represent it? There isn't a lot of focus on taking out critical infrastructure in Ghost in the Shell. So does it really count as cyber terrorism? They're a terrorist group. Section 9 is a terrorist fighting group. But are they really fighting cyber terrorism? Not by the real definition of it. Is the Laughing Man really a cyber terrorist? No, at that point in time, you can really just consider him more of a normal terrorist. Not really cyber terrorism. Is it actually possible? Can you actually take down critical infrastructure from hacking as a terrorist group? uh, are the things that the terrorist groups in Ghost in the Shell doing actually possible in this game? It's a really ambiguous question. Right now, absolutely not. Will it become possible? Most likely. The real issue Ghost in the Shell, again, doesn't really address very often. That happens in the real world is right now. Yeah. WikiLeaks? WikiLeaks really wouldn't be cyber terrorism, and the reason for that is this wasn't, they didn't hack the US government. It was given to them by an insider who had it. They definitely have done hacking, but as far as the major breach to the United States government from WikiLeaks, that's really more ambiguous, and you can start saying maybe that's whistleblowing, but it wasn't cyber-based because even though it was given to them in a computer format, they didn't hack the United States government to get it. It was given to them. So that doesn't really fall under the category. But as far as it being possible, it may be in the future. The real problem is, and doesn't get addressed in Ghost in the Shell again, is these things are advancing faster than they're creating security to protect it. For anyone who's ever worked in these kind of critical infrastructures. The businesses are more interested in that profit. Unfortunately, giving you the best service they possibly can, they don't always consider the security issues with it. And that's going to continue to happen. And eventually you will get a power grid taken down from a hacking attempt. It very likely will happen at some point. That's why recently you had Barack Obama say that it's the greatest threat to the United States. What that really means is the greatest threat that we can actually do something about. But as far as the way Ghost in the Shell presents it, a lot of the things that it addresses don't really hit to the core of the issue. You're not seeing a true image of cyber terrorism when you watch Ghost in the Shell. Terrorism and organized crime, this is what it does get right, very well. Cybercrime, or cyber terrorism and organized crime are going to be interlinked. These groups are going to do and are going to in the future use means to fund themselves that would make them look a little more like organized crime, and that does occur in Ghost in the Shell. They will use normal crime. If we take Al-Qaeda, for instance, they, for a very long time, used the poppy fields in Afghanistan to fund themselves, turn it into heroin, sell it to the United States, use that to fund themselves. So you're going to have, as far as the way that Ghost in the Shell presents it a lot, as like sometimes these terrorist groups and terrorists are committing normal crimes too, is completely accurate. That will continue in the future. It will definitely continue in a cybercrime sense too. From my own personal experience, terrorist groups do use a lot of cyber banking to launder money, to commit fraud, to get money, to further their purposes. Major difference between terrorism and organized crime when doing this is terrorists do not take as much money as organized crime. They will take as much money as they need to fund themselves. Cyber terrorism, it gets right, but it gets wrong. I just kind of hit over that, but boop down. Yeah, but even with the again, and I kind of meant that as a double meaning. Ghost in the Shell again presents the ethical issues very accurately. There are multiple times in the series when Section 9 just lets things happen. And they let things happen so things don't get worse. They lie to the public and let these terrorist groups do certain things to mitigate issues in the future. Those are the same ethical issues that law enforcement face in the real world. What do you tell the public? What don't you? What do you let these groups do? What don't you let them do? And then, of course, you have that culminated in the end of the second season where you have the main villain supporting refugees that are very sympathizing. And that will continue to be true in the future. cybercrime and cyberterrorism blending in the real world. It's also very accurate. As we become more computer-based society, cybercrime and cyberterrorism will be the same crimes that are committed today on the street, just using technology. Extortion is becoming very popular in the news now. So I mean, one of the really popular and growing types of crime is to infect your computer, lock it down, say in 24 hours, I'm going to erase everything on your computer if you don't give me $2,000. Right now, in a law enforcement perspective, we don't have much to do, don't have much of a reaction to that. So what's going to happen as these things blend together, just like in Ghost in the Shell, is the responses are going to seem inadequate at times. Again, Ghost in the Shell is very accurate on that. What you just had the Laughing Man run and take a CEO of a major corporation and threaten him in front of the public and got away scot-free. These are real issues. We are not advancing as fast as we need to be in the enforcement world, but that is something to be concerned about. And Ghost in the Shell is definitely accurate on that and how it presents it being normal crimes.
Going on there.
Sorry. Enforcement. Yeah, so we'll just talk pretty briefly about the enforcement. I don't want to get to the enforcement side of it. Enforcement tech. So the technology that we're using for law enforcement today is very similar to what's used in Ghost in the Shell. The helicopters, tank-like things, these data mining technologies, they're more specialized for the individuals who are doing them. But the technology is generally accurate. I'm not going to get too specific with it at this point because we kind of just ran over already the technology with that. So there are legal issues with the technology they use that aren't addressed in the show. Legal issues of tachicomas. We do use armored personnel vehicles for SWAT teams. The Secretary tried to weaponize them, the Supreme Court said no. LAPD tried to put a battering ram on APB and run it into buildings. They did not keep that for very long. So is a tachikoma really going to be something that's going to be allowed? No. We're not going to let law enforcement use personalized tanks that can shoot guns at you. That's not going to happen.
Also allowing them to have their own personalities is definitely not
We
doing
don't want
so well.
weaponized tanks that have their own minds. Which, isn't it, I mean, Ghost in the Shell does address that. It's
Also,
true.
I should say, number one thing Ghost in the Shell gets wrong. Number one, putting natural oil into a machine that has an artificial AI will not make it truly an AI. Yeah, just make it run maybe smoother. Maybe. Okay.
Got the question? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Legal issues of stealth. Ghost in the Shell, the movie did address this. Law enforcement, unlike Section 9, will not be able to use this willy-nilly. That is never going to happen. When you're talking about using these technologies in law enforcement, number one question you have to ask is the availability to the public. Is invisibility going to be available to the public? Are tachicomas going to be available to the public? No. So a lot of our legal decisions is based on, or as far as what law enforcement are allowed to use, are based really fundamentally in those considerations. What's a normal person allowed to do, and what extra rights are we willing to give to law enforcement? Invisibility is not really going to be one of them. Deception is already a hotly debated argument. Am I allowed to execute a warrant by dressing up as the pizza man and busting down your door the second you let me in and just swarm in? It's a really hotly debated topic. You can do it. You need a very specialized warrant and you need exigent circumstances to do it. Law enforcement aren't going to be running around willy-willy using stealth. It's not going to happen.
Currently, all the current colleges working on these invisibility cloaks all have contracts with DARPA. DARPA will not let anyone try to develop this technology without their okay, because again, it's even just like regular, it's like giving some crazy guy who has a lot of money buying a cloak that makes him unseeable by any sniper anywhere, and then giving him a gun and a roof is just waiting for his ass.
Yeah. This is kind of a strange issue. It is something that does happen in the real world. Legal issues of hacking after defense. Motoko does use hacking to defend her teammates. That would be an exigent. That's what I'm talking about. Exigent circumstances. I'm talking about like death situations, or in law enforcement terms, that also includes destruction of evidence and things like that. So would hacking be allowed to be done with that in law enforcement as free will as it is used in Ghost in the Shell? To some degree, yes. It's already done. We already do that in computer forensics. We already do that in tracking down people. You already saw it with the NSA. That was completely allowed under prison. Probably won't be allowed in the future. But it is at this point, and there's no real reason to think, I mean, there'll be a little bit more control in it, but there's no reason to think that that's not going to continue. The tactics. The tactics that are presented as far as what Section 9 does is heavily based on GSG 9, which is Germany's special ops group for their police. In the United States, we have the FBI's hostage rescue team. Their tactics, as they're presented in Ghost in the Shell, are accurate. And moving forward, there's no reason to think it'll change. The creators of the show and the movies clearly took exactly what GSG 9 does and put it in a cyber context. Those tactics will continue to be used. Major tactics, especially with the helicopter usage and fast roping, which is the propelling down off the side of the helicopter and things like that. Well, it is very accurate. Also, major technology I'd never ever want anyone to forget when it comes to law enforcement is crime mapping. That's increasingly being more used. We have what's called in law enforcement ComStat is becoming very important. ComStat is this use of targeted policing through the use of crime mapping. And Ghost in the Shell does utilize that quite a bit, and moving forward, that is something you're going to see routinely in law enforcement. Enforcement, structure and organization. Guess what? Section 9 is never going to exist. As far as they present them in the show, they are very similar to GSG 9. They are very different from GSG 9 as well. GSG 9, one of the major requirements Germany had set before they made the unit was that it could not be comprised of the military, could not be military personnel, it could not be former military personnel. It's the fear of having militarized police, and that is an issue that will, as far as Section 9 existing, will continue, and it's a debate we'll continue to have. So as far as it's structured, there's not going to be a Section 9 that's allowed to do whatever they want. They're going to work with, as these groups continue to grow, the GSG 9s, the FBI, and for reference, Japanese version is called the Special Assault Team. They will not have that structure. They will be much larger, and they will be much more integrated into other agencies. Integrated approach. What a nice segue, James. Thank you, James. So again, integrated approach. These are not going, Section 9, not going to exist as an independent group. You cannot fight them that way. It's not going to work. A Section 9 group needs to rely heavily on other law enforcement groups. It needs to rely heavily on the public. It needs to rely heavily on the private sector. So this magical Section 9 that just takes out cyber terrorists and have no recourse whatsoever and can just do it all on their own is not going to exist in the awful attempt at fighting terrorism. And as I said at the bottom, the Motoko quote is simple, over-specialized in weakness. It's a slow death. Absolutely. And Section 9 is over-specialized. Okay. Just to give a quick
again, the world of Ghost in the Shell is very different. The world of Ghost in the Shell takes place in a near future where two more world wars happen that fracture pretty much the modern political structure. So it takes place in a little more of a conservative world.
But the main issue is that the thing Ghost Shell does really well in sense, it portrays a near future with a lot of cool cybernetic technology, but a lot of it's still very reined in. Cars still look cars, infrastructure of highways still look like highways, buildings look the same. It doesn't try to take a fantastical approach to it. It shows us a lot of cool technology that is possible, and we very well could have. How long it'll take us to get around that could range from anywhere, again, like I said. 30 years, it could be. We never know. You never know how fast technology is. Someone's gonna have that, oh my God, this works, I've done it. This is how you do it. That moment could happen. It could very well happen. Very likely it won't. And it'll probably take, within our lifetime, we'll definitely see it start to take form. But I would say at least a good 50 years before we start to get to this technology being a thing that's always going to be. So I guess I'll just open it up if anyone has any questions. You in the blue here.
So it sounds like your suggestion is that in the future governments have access to the past against the use of government.
That's, yeah. So what he's basically asking is, if a government has all these crazy cyber bodies and a war, basically an army full of cyborgs that can stop anybody and nobody with their simple guns. I mean, again, in America, I don't think something like that would ever happen. I can say that again. Ghost in the Shell is, again, like I said, it's in a more conservative kind of world where they've had these world wars which forced the military technology to progress ahead. And again, like I said, I don't think
Normal people wouldn't have it. Rich people could be able to do it if they really wanted to. But the upkeep costs for it, the problem is I don't think we'd ever get to a point where like they have like at least even like 100 Motakos. It very likely would be small, like Saito where he has the eye. It would be very small, specialized. Yeah.